We would like to acknowledge that the episodes in this series are produced on the traditional unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for allowing us to be their guests.
It's really interesting. It's so interesting. Anyways, everyone, if I can get you all to settle yourselves, and we've got some pretty interesting folks in the room and a pretty interesting discussion to have, so we don't want to lose too much time with them. Welcome you all to our public forum, the Grandview Woodland Area Council, local community council for over 50 years now. Obviously affordable housing seems to be the crisis and issue of our time, and we're at sort of an interesting inflection point here with the federal government having changed and a prime minister who seems to want to engage. We're at a time when the market has taken an interesting turn on the private sales side of things that may open an opportunity for government to get more involved in keeping the building going. That we've got a lot of interesting opportunities here, and I guess the hope is to have a good discussion. You hear from these folks who know a lot about how housing gets built and what we might do to bring real affordability. We've seen years of building, but things aren't getting more affordable. So really, it's obviously not how much you build; it's what you build, and we need to sort of figure out how we get the stuff built that we need and the stuff that's going to be affordable. So I won't talk too much here, but what I'll say is we're going to try and have a really sensible, productive, respectful dialogue about this stuff. We're going to try and we're going to give our speakers the first round of about 10 minutes to kind of introduce, just to share their thoughts, kind of give us their perspective on this issue, and particularly as it relates to the Downtown East Side and the kind of significant issues that are evolving down there in terms of how they're going to bring in affordability, what's being proposed. We'll give them their 10 minutes each to kind of tell us share their thoughts on that, and then we're going to go to essentially you guys, and you'll have a chance to have a dialogue with them. We're going to ask everybody to make your questions really as questiony as possible, and less statements, more question, and try to keep it to about 30 seconds if you can, and then we're going to ask the speakers to keep their answers around under a couple of minutes so that we can kind of get as much dialogue as possible here. The real hope is that we maybe walk away with some ideas that might go somewhere, and some ideas that some of us can help to bring forward, maybe some ideas that the folks with power in the process can help us bring forward. So without further ado, I guess one thing I would like to say is, we're in this lovely room that we have in Britannia on this lovely warm sunny day, and this place that we're in is a really pivotal point. You see what's happening around the world with countries being bombed and people being displaced, and we have this amazing life and privilege here on this lovely land. And I think for me, every time I sort of feel that nurturing spirit of this land, I think, man, I'm really thankful to be here. I'm really thankful for the stewardship of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh over time immemorial, generations. That there's a place for me on this beautiful, sort of peaceful place. And the best I ever think we can do to acknowledge and respect and demonstrate our care for this place is to do things like this where we try to make things better. If we can make things better, we can come away through our life and our time on this land making it better for the next folks who are going to be here. That's the best we can hope for, to say that we've done our bit to acknowledge this place we have here. So without further ado, I guess I'll throw it over. Why don't we start with Andy? I guess we'll throw it over that end and go this way. Andy, if you want to start by sharing your thoughts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Again, the question being, how do we encourage our dollars from our new federal government to come in here and actually make affordability happen? Okay.
Well, Craig, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Yan. I'm the director of the city program. I'm sorry?
It's hard to hear you in the back.
Okay. Okay, I will try to enunciate.
If you stand up, it will also help.
Okay, sure.
It's good for your breathing.
I feel like choir practice, right? All right, hi everybody. I'm Andy Yan. I'm the director of the city program at Simon Fraser University, as well as a professor of professional practice in urban studies. I think that, thank you so much for the invitation to address you today. And I think that for me, it's also great to kind of, amongst the panelists between Rebecca, Jean, and Tom, that I remember meeting Jean 20 years ago now? Has that been?
I used to work at Carnegie.
I used to work at the Carnegie Community Action Project, and I was a young man then. I am not so anymore. And I think I remember back in 2006 when we first worked here, just to kind of frame this conversation, was it can't get this bad, like where we are in 2006. It wasn't great, but yet I think in kind of understanding and watching how the city and the region and the country has kind of changed, that well, it got worse, and I think that is probably that is the challenge of our day. That I think in coming up with this kind of question, I think that really how do we best position ourselves to attract federal dollars from our new government to affordable housing into the downtown east side and adjacent communities. Knowing the kind of 20 years that have happened between myself and knowing Jean, I decided, let's put this to ChatGPT. Let's see what generative AI will do, and really how much, what are the answers generative artificial intelligence has? Because so far, we seem to have this problem just seems to kind of maintain itself, and it gave me the 5 following points. Number 1, align with federal priorities and language. I can broaden out if you want me to kind of talk about this later on. Number 2, present coordinated shovel-ready projects. Number 3, frame the downtown east side as a national urban challenge. Again, ChatGPT, not me, ChatGPT. And number 4, mobilize political and civic support. Hello, everybody. And number 5, show results and accountability. And I think that it's kind of providing this as the framework. I wanted to just kind of reflect the history of this, and really how some of the conversations have also touched upon things like a new Vancouver agreement. And within the idea of, for those who are, how many people were aware of the Vancouver agreement? Some, and the Vancouver agreement was back in the early 2000s, an agreement between the municipal, federal, provincial, and federal governments to working together in terms of really what's happening with issues around housing, around economic development, and the challenges of mental health and addictions in the downtown east side, that they would coordinate this. To kind of go, I'm not really giving it much justice here, but to check out what they did with the Vancouver agreement. And it itself actually, I think, was deemed a success for a little while, but yet I think it's also one through which is open towards what the legacies are and towards how we perhaps need a renewed Vancouver agreement towards the municipal, federal, and provincial and federal governments that really ought to be part of the conversation today. And I think that it's important to kind of begin to break down why it succeeded, and also really how it wasn't just only the Vancouver agreement, that there was, I think, under the overall framework of a urban development agreements, that this is also one that you find in Saskatoon and Regina, as well as Winnipeg. That it isn't just about the city of Vancouver, but actually more about coalitions. And I think that that's what is missing out of these 5 points from ChatGPT, but really the importance of coalition building amongst cities, but then also amongst communities. That I think in talking about the downtown east side isn't just about the downtown east side, it's about the Grandview Woodlands, it's about really all the other neighborhoods that make up Vancouver and how they need to come together. And I think that it's also one, and I think this is really important, one of leadership. That I think that it's interesting coming into this facility that it was opened by Philip Owen. That Philip Owen was the mayor, the City of Vancouver mayor, that led the Vancouver Agreement, that provided the space through which the Vancouver Agreement started. And I think it really talks to the importance of leadership, of civic leadership, of how civic leadership needs to connect up with provincial and federal leadership, which is, I think, part of our conversation today. And I want to kind of highlight the importance of history, of understanding really how those successes, that if you kind of look at the history of Philip Owen, you would not have expected he would have done what he did in terms of the Vancouver Agreement. And I think that folks on this panel can perhaps elaborate on Philip Owen and perhaps the kind of politics of its time, and then also how it is possible today, or how it's changed certainly today. And so I think that I really want to kind of provide this initial framework. I really want to hear about the rest of this panel, from the rest of the panel, and kind of have a dialogue between the panelists as well as you, the audience. And so I'll leave it here and kind of pass it on to Councillor Bly to kind of bring in her perspectives as a Vancouver City, as a city councillor, as well as I believe, was it the chair of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities?
That's right. Yeah.
Woo, got it.
That's half my intro.
Yes, done. Okay, and I'll hand it over to her. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you very much to the organizers of the conversation, and thank you all for being here. These conversations wouldn't happen without the collaborative sort of dialogue of sharing. I'm just going to speak really briefly and focus in on the topic at hand, which is really about leveraging federal money and programs to build more affordable housing. And so yes, second term city councilor, was first elected with Jean in 2018 on the same council that Jean was on, and then re-elected in 2022. And now sit as an independent on council for reasons that have been well published. So I don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but needless to say, it was for me, it was an important distinction in public policy, which is around, until everyone has a home in our city, no one's out of the housing game, as far as I'm concerned. And that was a really important, and to be quite honest, quite a surprise that was the turn that particular policy took, which was no net new supportive housing units. For as long as someone's sleeping outside, they need a net new supportive housing unit. So logically did not make any sense to me. And so anyway, I can do a lot more actually as an independent, so it's actually quite good. I'm also the president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and for those that don't know, and most don't, and I certainly didn't before being elected, there is this group, it's a federation that represents 2,100 municipalities across the country, coast to coast to coast, from communities as small as 200 to Toronto, maybe the biggest city we have. It's really interesting how many of the challenges we face in Vancouver are similar to scale in all these different communities, and they're growing, particularly around homelessness, coming out of COVID, and mental health and addiction. So these are growing issues that are not just reserved now for big urban centers. They're growing challenges right across the country. And why that matters is because federal programs now more than ever need to be making the difference for communities, particularly those that don't have extra property tax dollars or capital to invest in housing like we do here in Vancouver. Not that we have extra, but we do have affordable home programs, Vancouver Affordable Housing Endowment. We have options, empty homes tax revenue. This is all designated for building affordable housing within the city of Vancouver. So it's an interesting opportunity because we now have our past mayor, as we know, Gregor Robertson, who's the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure, and that's a critical turning point, I think, for our city, because nobody knows better than Gregor Robertson the challenges we face in our city, not just with homelessness, that getting the help we need from federal and provincial governments to fund the kind of housing we need. I've spoken to private developers, I've spoken to architects, I've spoken to public policy, and from what I've heard, everyone agrees for Vancouver to solve the housing and homelessness challenges that we have, we must have senior government funding to do that. The private sector is not going to build enough housing to support folks and the increasing number of folks that are in precarious housing. So I would say that that's a point of agreement that I would certainly stand up to or stand up for, and have had that conversation with the Minister of Housing. And I think their programs now coming out of the election are an interesting opportunity. 500,000 affordable homes across the country each year in the coming years is a very ambitious goal, but I think it's one that represents a willingness to actually make meaningful investment in affordable housing at the federal level. And on my time at FCM, which has been about 7 years now, I can't say we've actually had that willingness. It's oftentimes been deferred to the local provincial governments in all the different provinces and territories across the country, that their mandate and responsibility is housing. And for the first time since I've been elected and in this role, a very clear commitment from the federal government is that they see housing as I would also say a human right, and also the responsibility of the federal and provincial governments to work together to deliver it. So I think we can have a really fruitful conversation there. There's lots of, there's great work happening with the Community Land Trust SRO Collaborative, Downtown Eastside Land Trust, in terms of bringing some privately owned SROs into a land trust. So that's an interesting advocacy opportunity with the federal government. And then, of course, we're looking at the different zoning, let's say the quiet part out loud, in the DEOD, but it's not to shift it and have that pendulum swing so far that we're solely relying on and enabling zoning that supports private development. That was never the intention in 2014 when the Downtown Eastside Area Plan came out with the 60/40 zoning. It doesn't serve the community to eliminate zoning that still requires senior government funding, but maybe we could change the formula to be able to do more faster with senior government funding. And I think not going out too far, too fast, and changing that zoning that's currently on the table, and I'm happy to have that conversation tonight, is an important consideration that we move very carefully, because there's too many. I brought a motion forward, I'll just say it was called the Vancouver Agreement 2.0, called the Uplift Downtown Eastside Motion, and the intention was really to focus on the ecosystem, the holistic way that we can uplift the Downtown Eastside, that focus on housing, economic development, including social enterprise, but allowing folks to find and also shop for goods that they can afford in the community, and health. And it hasn't necessarily materialized in policy in the 2.5 years, but that doesn't mean that that is not already unanimously supported direction to council, to staff, that they are going to start delivering back on. So lots in there to talk about. Happy to take questions once we get to that point, and look forward to the discussion, and thanks again for my co-panelists for being here and for you all being here.
Take off all my disguises here.
We knew who you were anyway.
Yeah. So thanks for being here, everyone, and caring about homelessness, and thanks and gratefulness to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for allowing us to be on their land and taking care of it for millennia, and hope we can all work to get it back to them and or get them compensated for it. So I'm on the board of the Carnegie Community Center Association. Maggie Lord here is the prez. And the board doesn't like homelessness. So we started this project called the Carnegie Housing Project. We got a grant, and we hired Devin O'Leary, who should be here in a minute. And we've been doing policy research. Oh, you are here. And he has some handouts for you, right? Sure. And Yeah, so we've been having town halls and talking to residents about what they want in the neighborhood, things like that. And we produced this report. It's got 42 recommendations on how to deal with homelessness in the downtown east side. That they boil down to stop the loss of affordable housing, build new social housing that poor people can afford, because most people can't afford most poor people can't afford social housing, and treat homeless people humanely in the meantime with shelters, tiny home villages. So I'm just going to start with kind of an info dump so you get the idea of the depth of the homelessness issue in Vancouver. We need over 10,000 units of $500 a month housing for people on welfare, disability, and the basic seniors pension.
Jean, can you speak up, please?
I'll give it a try. We need over 10,000 units of housing in Vancouver for people on welfare, disability, and seniors pension at $500 a month, including about $3,500 for people who are homeless. And in addition, you should probably know that there's about 1,000 more homeless people than there are shelter beds. And so that those 1,000 people have to sleep on the street at night. And then in the morning, when the people in the shelters are kicked out, they have to be on the street. So we got some quotes from homeless folks. One, sleeping outside is hard. We didn't sleep. We basically just lay there all night. I don't know how people can do it for years and years. Another one, I don't have hope. I've jumped through every hoop. Been on the housing list for years. Another one, I don't know what it's like sleeping on a bed or a couch. So homelessness is bad, and we need 3,500 units for these folks. But we also need to replace about 6,500 SRO units. These units have no bathrooms, they have no kitchens, they're about 100 square feet, and they would not do well in a big earthquake. And in addition to that, we have 600 units of supportive modular housing that could be history by 2031 because the city has no plan to extend their land leases. So the good news is we do have about a measly 440 units of shelter rate housing in the works over the next few years. But as Rebecca said, market housing is not going to trickle down to people who can afford $500 or $600 a month. There's just no way. We have to build social housing. Unfortunately, in Vancouver, most social housing that isn't supportive actually excludes poor people. How many knew that?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Most new social housing in Vancouver that isn't supportive housing, it excludes poor people. The Vancouver definition of housing is owned by a government or a nonprofit, and 30% rents at Hills. Hills is housing income limits. It's a BC housing term, and it means about $40,000 to $107,000 depending on your income, depending on how many bedrooms you have. So if you're under $40,000, you're pretty much hooped for social housing unless your housing provider gets some extra dough. So then the downtown east side is facing this additional crisis, which Rebecca alluded to, which is the city plans to implement its version of her motion, which calls over and over again for more supportive and social housing. But the implementation plan that they have calls for 32-story market towers, and which would push up property values and make it really hard to build social housing in the downtown east side, which is what we need. So our housing project has been asking folks in the hood what they think would improve the neighborhood. And they say things like housing we can afford, more mental health support, greenery, hangout spaces with overdose prevention services so people don't have to be in the street. Guess what they didn't say? They didn't say 32-story market rental towers, which is what the city is planning. So we're seeking allies in our fight against this and for what we need. And I just want to add, and Rebecca alluded to this too, that she's probably the author of this. nationwide, homelessness is really bad. And it was the FCM that said we could have 250,000 homeless people by 2030. So the feds have to jump in and do something about this. It's their responsibility. So what can we do? Like, I've broken it down by level of government. There's a lot that the city can do, especially this city, because it's been horrible on homelessness. Change the zoning to let supportive modular housing stay, at least until there's an imminent development on the site. Use city land for low-income housing instead of prioritizing revenue generation from development. Push the province for tools like a mansion tax to generate revenue for low-income housing. So expand the downtown east side definition of social housing. In the downtown east side, unlike the rest of the city, 1/3 of social housing has to be at those $500 a month. Expand that, but that has to go with lobbying for more money to actually, so the nonprofits can actually implement it. Support creative interim solutions like shelters, hangout spaces, and tiny home villages. Stop the upcoming gentrification plan and replace it with what the community really needs, some of which was in Rebecca's motion. So at the provincial level, we need vacancy control. Do you guys all know what that is?
You can explain it.
So vacancy control is a law that says landlords can't raise rents as much as they like when a tenant leaves. Because we don't have it, we're losing tens of thousands of affordable units every year. We need vastly more funding for the Community Housing Fund, which is the only provincial housing program that requires at least 20% of social housing to be at the shelter rate. We need a speed up of renovations at the Regent de Balmoral and 301 Hastings, East Hastings. They're just sitting there waiting to be renovated and nothing is happening. It's so frustrating, and they all need to be at shelter rate. Funding for the Downtown East Side Community Land Trust, which has a great model for operating hotels that people love and build a lot of community within the buildings, and raise social assistance rates. And then federally, the feds have to start funding non-market housing for low-income people. They can't just say, oh, we're spending all these billions, and it turns out that it's not really money they're spending, it's a low-interest loan, and it's only for market housing. So what we're saying is all non-market housing should have at least 1/3 at shelter rate, but the feds and the province have to fund that. And provide direct support for land trusts, like Tom's, like the Downtown East Side one. So what can you do? Try to meet with your various provincial representatives, federal representatives, and city folks to get these things. At the city, there should be a motion coming soon about saving the modular housing, so keep your eye open for that. Help us stop the plan to gentrify the poorest part of the downtown east side. Keep homelessness in mind when voting at all levels of government. Make the politicians address it. It would be great if you could meet Joan Phillip as a Grandview Woodlands Area Council and ask her to do some of the things that I've talked about and Devin sent around the list. Federally, I think that is our best hope. I looked at Gregor's 2008 inaugural speech. Oh, it was really strong on homelessness. He actually wanted to end it. And he did put aside city land for non-market housing. And now he's in charge of homelessness and he has the capability of ending it. So we need to push him to create a federal program that will actually fund non-market housing for low-income people, not just affordable housing, which means nothing. It has to be for low-income people. And federal money for the Downtown East Side Land Trust. And another thing we could push is that the housing that gets built could be permanent modulars. So programs like this could be scaled up in industry in response to US tariffs. So that's it for me. I hope you can help us in pushing all our politicians for what we need to end homelessness. And take a look at the handout that Devin sent around, and maybe it'll some of it's facts and some of it's what you can do. So I hope you can join us in doing some of that stuff. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank you so much for the invitation to share a panel with three people I admire a lot. Talk about a day of contrasts. Right? I spent the better part of the morning with the housing and planning staff in the district of Oak Bay. A hotbed of social activism. And even they're starting to pay attention to the fact that they've got aging building and aging renters. Not that many renters, but the occasional renter in the district, and not wanting to lose them. And trying to work with the provincial requirements to see if there might be a way to incorporate a co-op component into new development or redevelopment in the district. Pretty small, not a lot of spare land, but it's a start, right? And you have to start somewhere. So I couldn't decide in preparing for tonight, I couldn't decide whether to try to annoy half of you with everything I say, or all of you with half of what I say. So you tell me where we come down in the middle, because, and I say that because I think this is a time when we really do have to think differently. I kind of made a little list of, what do we have going for us, what do we have going, working against us. And for us, we do have a federal government with a mandate, as they put it, to build more homes at a scale we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. That is that's an order of magnitude beyond the scale that we're building now. Even if you don't count the need for the rights supply, it's a monumental challenge. So if that's the goal, we're part of the solution. So there's something. The community housing sector, by that I mean co-ops, nonprofits, indigenous-led housing, supportive housing, has never been better organized and never had more capacity on the ground than it does now. So that's something we have going for us. What do we have going against us? Well, just when the feds are coming back to the table in a serious way, we could say since 1992, although 2017 is a bit of a blip there when the National Housing Strategy was introduced. Just when that's starting to look like it might hold some promise, every indication is that the province is starting to worry about running out of money. Because the latest round of the Community Housing Fund call for proposals is the last planned round of calls. And there is no plan to issue a fourth call. So if you want to think about what that means in practical terms, you could probably walk to it not too far. At 1885 East Pender, you'll see a vacant lot. And that vacant lot is the former home of the Aaron Webster Housing Co-op. That housing was in such dilapidated shape. We're grateful to the city for not condemning it, when they probably should have, so we could arrange for a transition plan. Every member of Aaron Webster Co-op is now safely and comfortably and affordably housed in a building we acquired from the city at 95 East First. There's two co-ops sharing that building, Rail Yard and Aaron Webster. That site, the city of Vancouver, I'll say, has done everything it could possibly have done, short of issuing a building permit. To make building on that site viable, it's been through 2 rounds of application to the province and 1 round to the federal government for the funding it would need to double the number of co-op homes on that site, with consistent rejection all the way through. So this is our last time. If the funding isn't approved for the site this time around, you'll probably see us on the site with maybe a few city councilors announcing that if we can't get some investment in the site, that we may have to sell. So there's the how desperate the situation is around provincial funding these days. The scale of the problem is so ominous, but so is the scale of, I think there's a lot of resistance now to what I might call poverty fatigue. There's a kind of prevailing view that the problem in the downtown east side and elsewhere is so big it can't be solved, so why bother trying, right? I think that's the sentiment lurking behind some of the rationales you hear for not investing money where it needs to be invested. So I think the big question, and this is where I think there's not a universal consensus in the community housing sector, is can we scale up our sector to match the scale of the problem? right? And that's a hard lesson we had to learn in the co-op housing over 40 years. Our, co-op housing in Canada goes back to the early 70s. And over 4 decades, I mean, there are 15,000 co-op homes in BC. The average co-op is 56 homes, small. So if you're looking for what everyone says they love about co-ops, that small, intimate, supportive, diverse community that really works as a neighborhood and a housing and community ecosystem, perfect. If you're looking for a real estate asset that needs to be leveraged in the next round of development to scale up to match the scale of the problem, not so perfect. So we spent a good decade, and so I'll go back to several of us have mentioned Gregor Robertson. Gregor Robertson's Affordable Housing Task Force report in 2012 was really what catalyzed the emergence of a community land trust system in Vancouver, and is now partnering with, at least at last count, 9 separate municipalities around the province, not just on the mainland either. We're going to break ground on a new co-op in North Cowichan, of all places, this summer. So that was, and he did it by asking a really simple question. He said, look, if we gave you land, could you build affordable homes? And at the time, 2014, getting those first 4 sites, if you wander by the Fraserview Riverside or Fraserview Towers co-ops in the River District, or that lovely building in the 1700 block of Kingsway, you'll see the outcome of that initial portfolio of sites. But that's what it was, right? It was a portfolio. Every co-op you see developed from 1973 to 1992 is a one-off housing provider. So if we'd set out in, back in the early 80s to build ourselves the most disaggregated real estate asset base we could possibly imagine, it would be the co-op housing, right? So where do you go from there? And it's our fault, right? We never built an engine for growth into the movement, and we never built long-term asset management capacity into the movement. And that's what a community land trust model brings. So you can say to an investor with patient capital, your 50-year money is safe because we have a professionally developed and managed asset plan, and we're big enough across a portfolio of homes to weather the storm of a dip in interest rates or a rise in interest rates or whatever might be happening to plumbing or building systems across co-ops and co-op homes. We can handle it because we have equity on the balance sheet. We can build our way or manage our way or redevelop our way out of that crisis because we're operating at scale. It is not without controversy in our own movement because people are attached to neighborhoods, people are attached to the built form that they may have lived in for literally 40 years. And that's a tough pill to swallow, to embrace that kind of change. But the match for that, though, is if we don't do that, we are not going to attract the interest that the federal government is bringing to the table. You've heard, Prime Minister Carney is not a career politician. He's a banker. He's a national and transnational finance guy, a macroeconomist who is only interested in big outcomes to match big problems. And if somebody takes him a proposal for that cute, cozy, everyone's going to love it development on the corner, he's going to say that is not interesting to me because it's a solution that does not match the scale of the problem. So why am I encouraged? Because, as others have mentioned, there isn't just one community land trust foundation in town. We have one. We're on our way now to having 3,200 homes in the community land trust. We're building them, we're buying them, we're redeveloping them, and they're going to be permanently affordable for a wide range of incomes. The SRO Collaborative, incorporating a land trust in the downtown east side, is an amazing piece of progress. Hogan's Alley Society has a land trust now reclaiming an entire historic neighborhood. The Falls Creek Community Neighborhood Association has incorporated a community land trust to represent those 7 co-ops, just over 700 homes on the south side of Falls Creek. So it's a movement. There's only been a Canadian network of community land trusts for 2 years. The first land trust in North America only emerged in 1969 in Georgia, so we're young, but we're making a difference, and I think if we're prepared to organize at scale, to embrace a new way of demanding a solution, not waiting for someone to deliver homes to us, but demanding a solution that we have the capacity to act as social purpose real estate developers. We've got a pretty exciting mandate coming up ahead of us, and I can't wait to have the discussion.
I'm going to lead off with the first question coming from our sticker station here, where people had a chance to weigh in on some of their questions in here was important, and then I'll throw it over to everybody else to jump in. I guess I'd ask for you to comment on what you see. Do you see a benefit to a more active role for the federal and provincial governments, or the government themselves as a developer to bring in affordability? Do you think that that's part of the solution, to have them directly involved in it, or is there some nuance to that solution? We'll start with Rebecca. We just keep going along, and again, a couple. We're going to try and, as much as we want to hear, so much from you, a couple minutes to just sort of give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I think that there's some nuance to the question, but it talked about federal and provincial governments, I think, being the ones that are actually building the housing. Is that right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sort of to Tom's point as well, I'm not sure how realistic that is. From talking to the federal government, their interest is, I'm competing with the ice cream truck.
That just doesn't seem fair.
And so the Housing Accelerator Fund is a fund that from the last 4 or so years has proven successful across the country. It doesn't mean that everybody gets the funds that they apply for, so there's an opportunity to put a lot more funding in it, but as a mechanism, the Housing Accelerator Fund is, I had the pleasure of interviewing Mark Carney a few days after government returned, and he was at the helm on the Friday and asked him that specific question, and he said, we're going to leverage funds that are already working so that we can get the money out the door as fast as possible. And then he specifically named the Housing Accelerator Fund. I think we can't deny the fact that the cost of construction, doesn't matter who's building it, is outpacing our ability to actually deliver more affordable housing. So the cost of labor, the cost of materials, the cost of actually doing that work is growing in terms of its increasing cost. And so I think that's impacting affordability. And then the province, I think what the challenge is, and what Tom was saying, is that the province is not, it's not a real good news story in terms of where they sit financially. And we know that the cost of some of the deeply affordable housing that Jean's referring to requires quite a bit of operating, and that's usually where we struggle to sort of put the formula together. Capital investment is one thing if the federal government comes to the table with that, but for operating, they're going to need that. The last piece is around municipal government, and do I think we should be in the business of building market housing? I think that is a bit of a slippery slope and a missed opportunity, because what we have that is a unique opportunity is land, and essentially free land. So we have to look at the funds where that land is within our charter, within our city construct, and look at, are we doing the best by the residents of Vancouver by delivering the deepest affordability on the land that we already own. And the federal government said, and I'm going to just wrap up here, they're looking for crown land. If they're looking for crown land to build, they'll also be looking for land that other cities and governments own as well. So I think we should be looking at how do we leverage that land to build greater affordability.
Out of frustration, I want to know, I'm waiting to hear what Tom says about this, but some folks that I know, we put our heads together and said, oh, we wish it was like Little Mountain. We wish it was like Raymer. We wish it was like Stamps Place, where the government just went in and built the housing and we have it and people can live in it and low-income people can afford it. So to answer that question, we thought that it might help because you would get rid of one level and just have the government go in. But if the government isn't doing it, then you have to have something else, like community land trust or nonprofits or whatever. So just waiting to hear what Tom says.
Well, so the question is, should,
So the role for, the direct role for very seldom government and actually being the developer and then building homes, really is down to where I'm from.
so my vague answer is, it's a terrible idea. When has government ever, at the federal or provincial level, ever been able to do something better than the community? Ever, right? And anyone who thinks it's a smart idea for governments to own assets in land and housing, I just have two words, and Jean just said them, Little Mountain. Right? Community assets should be used to build community wealth. That's it.
Because that is, I'm baffled at the situation where the co-op owns the land. There was a co-op there before. The city, the co-op went to, and the land trust went to city council, and the land was rezoned for a development that fits within the community plan zoning 4.5 years ago, I'm thinking. And then it just stops. And so I guess my question is, what can we as community members do to assist? Because it's alarming to hear that you say that you're going to try one more time, and if not, then you have to sell the land. Is there some way that the co-op and the community land trust can motivate people in the community to help speak to our MLAs and MPs and have some kind of community campaign to say, this is exactly what is needed in this area, is a brand new expansion of an existing co-op?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, and, okay, so just between us. Okay, we're never gonna sell the land, but we are gonna say that we will, right? Because it's pretty much the only point of leverage we have there. But you're right. The city, as I said, did everything. The co-op transferred its land into the community land trust, ready to go. I honestly think it's because the province, in the way it has stripped all the nuance out of the evaluation criteria for new homes, doesn't put any value on recognizing a diversity in forms of tenure. So it can't understand what a co-op is, and it doesn't see why it should prioritize co-ops over nonprofit rentals. So if you wanted to do something, the best thing you could do is say to the government, we're glad you're investing in new affordable housing. We want more nonprofit, more indigenous-led housing, but we want to see some co-ops too, because that diversity in forms of tenure is really important.
Hi. I just wonder if you make a distinction between housing for people who are homeless or currently living in SROs and affordable housing for people who are in their 20s who are trying to start a family that just can't afford a place to live in the city. And if so, how do you prioritize those two different problems?
So I'm just, what I was talking about was people who desperately need housing now because they're at risk of becoming toast at the first big earthquake, where they're on the street now. The people that you're talking about, some of them are in that situation, I guess. Not very many. Fortunately, there's not too many kids who are homeless families. Usually if someone's working, they have a little bit more money than $500 a month for rent. But there definitely should be a level of affordability that's between the $500 a month that people on welfare and disability and basic pension can afford and market rent. And that's where the Hills comes in, you know, $40,000 a year. 30% of social housing has to be for that group, and maybe they could squeeze in there, but there still isn't enough. There still needs to be a lot more. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I mean, there's also this further complication to the fact that what's the fastest growing demographic of homeless people in the city of Vancouver?
Seniors.
Women, seniors. And the good news for us fellas, you're dead. That's the good news I have to tell you. Like, you're dead. That there's a reason why when we talk about seniors, that age begins at 55. It's the brutality of homelessness and how it slowly kills you. And I think that this is an interesting kind of dilemma that you face in terms of housing, in terms of what happens in terms of age demographics with 20-somethings, but then also with those that are aging. And I think that what's within that question is actually the majority of those senior women. And I have to emphasize, I just finished a new chapter on aging and housing, and it was stunning actually to kind of look at the very specific demographics of that who are they? They're typically renters. And so touching upon really what Jean is talking about in terms of vacancy control, and also in terms of rental protection, is they are arguably the most vulnerable in terms of what's happening towards redevelopment and how the city has also come on down in terms of how they're doing their redevelopment schemes. And I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges because of those that might fall through in terms of tenant rental protection, in terms of really what plays on in towards the future games that really talks about the rate of change, the pace of change. And I think that this is where the danger is. We have these redevelopment schemes that they end up to be homeless creation strategies, right? And really, how well are they actually thought out? That they can talk about the promise of thousands of new units, but who loses out? And I think that this is one of the ongoing challenges in terms of the creation of housing, specifically about who are they for? That when it comes to certain I think population groups, that you're able to kind of meet their needs, but yet at the same time the market can't meet others. And one section is our seniors, senior women. And I think that this is really one of the ongoing challenges in terms of housing, is also one of the demographics and how the region is changing. It's not only the city of Vancouver, but the metropolitan region is changing in terms of its demographics, and how, believe it or not, one of the biggest things you could do is perhaps focus on housing for seniors to kind of have a kind of movement in and out of a system that I think is part of a larger strategy. But I think that this is really one of those ongoing, I think, really challenges that we're facing, is in terms of security of tenure for particular populations. And I think one of the most vulnerable are elder women. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
If I could just follow up on that, the life expectancy for people who are homeless is 49. So just to emphasize what you said. And then seniors in apartment buildings have a target on their back because they have lived there longer than other people, generally speaking. And so if the landlord can get rid of them because we don't have vacancy control, they can raise the rent a lot. And that's one of the reasons to stop what Andy's talking about, that we desperately need vacancy control.
I think just to add one or two things is, so I had a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old, so I'm just focusing in on the part where I don't want my son to live with me forever, and he doesn't want to live with me forever. It's security of tenure as well. So it's really, because to what Jean's saying, and I agree with all the comments, that it's super complicated, because what I find quite surprising, my daughter works as a veterinary technician, full-time work, really good job, been there for 5 years, and I think it's maybe like $55,000 a year is the salary. So that in itself is like, how does that person kind of, my daughter or anyone else like her, go to school, pay for education? Many have to pay back their education and student loans, and pay, so she's in a 485 square foot apartment now with her boyfriend, but she was there on her own. And it's probably, I think it's being rented now at $2,800 a month, but she got in 3 years ago, so she pays $23, $24. It's still a lot. So yes, thank you. So according to Hills, 30%, I think she should be paying $13.75 to be able to have enough for groceries, and we know the cost of groceries. So we have, I think the conversation sometimes, thank you for that, quick math. I just think that sometimes the conversation is a little binary a little ideological, and there's so much nuance to it that, because we need to slightly grow the economy for the business where she works, to have more customers, to then pay more so that she can afford to, earn or like pay more for her rent, while also building the affordable house, because we live in a society where private market rental is part of our housing continuum, and we can't deny that as much as we don't like it. So it's like, how do we, but right now it's just been a drop in the bucket compared to the need, where, a private development delivers 15 or 10% of inclusionary zoning or affordable housing that's only just below market. But we can't rely on, especially in an inflationary period, for developers to build the affordable housing, because that's not working either. So it's a really difficult, rents did come down, but they're likely to go right back up again because housing starts are down close to 30% in 2025. We won't feel the pain of that in terms of the cost of rent for the young people that you're talking about, that probably for 2 or 3 years. And then we're gonna wish we did more now about it down the road. So, but I do think we need to talk more, and I think the Prime Minister now, is the right Prime Minister of our time that recognizes that affordability isn't just reducing housing costs, it's increasing what people are able to earn.
Barbara?
Thanks. My name's Barbara. Rebecca, thanks. That probably folds into my question. I'm newer to the community. I want to thank all of you. What an honor to have all you here, and thanks for your efforts in regards to homelessness. I'm curious about, Rebecca, this is probably more directed at yourself, where the accountability is in regards to money laundering. Billions and they're saying sometimes now it's getting up into the hundreds of billions of dollars is being laundered in the Canadian real estate market every year. Our current registry in British Columbia, for transparency, even though foreign landowners are required to register, there's no enforcement of it, and there's no follow-up and investigation into who those registered owners are. The money laundering, and that hits us at every level here, with addiction, with fentanyl crisis. I mean, there's so much laundering going on in the community. Probably another thing, the module thing. Curiously enough, I'm probably a little bit of the devil in the room in East Vancouver here. I worked in the oil industry for 25 years, mobilizing crews of up to 700 men, 800 men around northern Alberta and housing them immediately. So, I think some of the models that Carnegie's working on, they're very doable. We were doing them all the time. So I really encourage you, and hopefully I'm going to follow up some more with yourself on that. That's really something we can be doing. It's always kind of blown my mind here, why in this community we cannot have immediate modular housing for, because, time to maybe how much are we looking at what they are doing in other areas in regards to housing men. These flotels, maybe a little pricey, but these options are out there and people are doing them day and night, so.
Yeah, I was just up in Squamish today, and I was like, what is that theory and its housing for the contractors that are working on the project up there?
Yeah.
I'll just, so it's with the province to the first part, in terms of money laundering, and they've, I'm not an expert on that by any stretch, but I think that as a city councillor, I worry and have felt the impacts of what appears to be sort of an unmanageable flow of fentanyl and stronger drugs into our community. And even with COVID, with the borders shutting down, we still had then different drugs came on the market because maybe fentanyl wasn't as regularly available, and we saw benzodiazepine and Narcan-resistant toxic drugs that are, so that in itself, through our courts, I would say, as well, is just like an untenable situation that obviously lies with the RCMP, with the Vancouver Police Department, and working with the province. And now with the federal government, again, I think that, there's not a lot of silver linings to Trump, but maybe like putting a spotlight on how fentanyl is moving across our continent is actually a really important conversation, because I don't think we've talked enough about it.
And but most importantly, in housing costs.
Well, I think they're tied,
The
yeah.
laundering within the real estate market.
Yeah, and foreign ownership there's been a crackdown on foreign ownership, and that has had its ramifications, but I also think that part of that sort of horse left the barn happened over a decade ago or more, that really damaged the cost of real estate and the cost of land in our city. On the workforce housing, I completely agree, and Jean alluded to, there's a permanent modular housing program, it's called PIMSHE, Permanent Modular Supportive Housing Initiative. It actually was what Arvidas and 7th was going to be, in terms of something that could be stood up very quickly, and at a greater density, because, you know, in northern Alberta, you got nothing but land. So you could put workforce housing for 700 people, no big deal.
Very small spaces though, we also are put on lease lines. We can't just put it wherever we like.
No, I agree, but you've got a lot, and what we don't want to do is house folks in a way that they're going to be displaced in another year because we haven't put enough housing on that one piece of land, and we see that down at Main and Terminal. It's still there, it's workforce housing, it came up real quick about 2 years ago. And I supported extending the leases for the temporary modular. It wasn't supported by the council at that time. But I think the challenge is making sure that we are housing the most amount of folks that need the affordable housing on smaller sites that we already have. And again, we made a commitment with the provincial government that we would have 300 units of housing across 5 projects delivered. And the permanent modular housing, so what you're talking about, was part of that program. So I think we're on the same page there. And I think the other thing we haven't mentioned, and I don't know, Andy, if you've got a thing or two to say about this, is around the prefabricated modular housing as being the focus of the federal government's, just to bring it back to the topic of the day, the federal government wants to bring on more of that modular prefabricated housing in whatever form. I don't know if you do a lot of that or not, Tom, with co-ops. But I've seen a few sites lately, and it's very, very efficient housing. It can be stood up very quickly, and hopefully in time with more of it more affordably than other types of housing. But it's super low density at this stage, so it would have to be, you know, again, there isn't going to be one answer that if we do this, then we're going to solve the problems. But if we do these 20 things, then maybe we can make a significant improvement. Frederic?
Well, I mean, I can go into further details about the money laundering issue and foreign ownership because that's kind of what kind of my jam. But then part of it is really, I think, I think part of the issue is actually how little the Culinary Commission has been implemented. I think that that's a greater problem, and I think ironically it also touches upon our own addictions, our provincial addictions to real estate. That there is an element through which I think is incredibly challenging to think about really the role of money laundering mixed in with foreign ownership, mixed in with investment and commodification of real estate. That we have a very conflicted relationship with real estate. That we're talking about when we talk about newly built condominiums in the city of Vancouver, 50% are investor owned. When we talk about really the role of really how many of them are, you know, about 10% of people's third or greater properties. So how do you deal with, you know, people on their third servings when when some people don't even have a plate? And I think that this is really, I think, that moment through which there needs to be this reckoning. I'm a big fan of really what happened, and I mean it's funny because there's some folks who argue that, well, in a free market we should let the market bear what price how things are and price who owns what. But in some of the most freest markets on the planet, and I'm talking about places like Singapore, there are incredibly strong social housing programs. I think something like 80% of the population lives in social housing. I think that coupled with a taxation system that says, sure, you can own 3 properties, but you will be paying for it. And I think that this is really understanding, I think this is the strength of this particular panel, is really coming in towards the tactical, I think very specific challenges of delivery to these larger strategic moves, that systemic changes that still need to occur. And I think that this is really, I think, talks to Craig's organization of this panel to kind of try to cover that waterfront. But you know, we can talk about the details of these kind of ongoing challenges. But I think right now, you know, there are still opportunities not only for specific specific investments, but then larger policy challenges. I think things around the Cullen Commission, things around how people who own multiple properties really ought to see a level of taxation. I think that it's also touching into very specific policy, and as Tom and I were talking about, really the right of first refusal for particular types of buildings for nonprofits. That you see examples in Montreal in terms of apartment buildings that are put out on the market, that it's really the city that's given the right of first refusal, and it could be a number of different types of non-market agents that are given the right of first refusal first, and really, I think, strengthening things like the Rental Protection Fund. But I think that this is part of that kind of discussion, and the challenges of housing, where you have very tactical, very specific challenges of specific sites, right up until public policy, talking around taxation, talking about money laundering, that all come into dealing with housing.
So I appreciate Andy brought that up, because I brought a motion forward around the right of first refusal, and staff came back and said that it is not needed here, and I based it off the Montreal model. So I would agree, and where we focus that is around faith-based land. You know, that if they are looking to sell, that the city could come in and be first in line for, you know. And there's lots of opportunity there around land trust as well, potentially co-op. What was the last thing you just said that I wanted to? We do have empty homes tax. So if somebody does own 3, I'm not defending that, and I appreciate the comments around, the challenges that go along. I do think that we don't see a lot of strata redevelopment come to council as a rezoning anymore, nearly at all now. But I do think it was a massive issue that was left unchecked about 10 years ago. Again, fail to plan, plan to fail. But now with the empty homes tax, a home can't sit empty without paying, you know, upwards of average out $30,000 for one property in a year, multi-million-dollar property, and that money goes back into paying for affordable housing. So through taxation, there's one lever there that the city brought in, or that Gregor Robertson's day brought in, called the empty homes tax, to make sure that people aren't sitting on empty apartments or strata.
That can still be laundered money though, because there's no agency that's following.
Notwithstanding the laundered money issue, but so we don't have empty condos sitting out there, and without there being some sort of form of taxation that's quite significant, it's like 3%.
But, I mean, one of the challenges is actually enforcement. That I think there's one study that talks about how 1/3 of those empty home taxes are only received in terms of an enforcement action. That this is really part of, this is the other side of public policy. You can have as many rules and regulations you have on the ground, but what's the enforcement? And I think this is actually part of the kind of ongoing challenges in terms of this discussion. I mean, you know, it's funny because when it comes to empty homes, I think, sure, you can have an empty home, but you'll be paying for it. That I think that fundamentally, in terms of my work, it's my action is that there shouldn't be free parking in Vancouver real estate. That I think that those moments of having free parking where you can park money from whatever type of activity into Vancouver real estate, repricing it towards a level of unaffordability for local incomes, come to a fundamental, real ethical question within our politicians, within our leadership. That is this the type of system we want to support, and if not, how do we change it? So I think that I want to kind of highlight that when it comes to empty homes taxes, I did the first study on empty homes on that, and really the kind of ethical concerns that comes in terms of really what happens with an empty homes, and that very much people may very well have an empty home, but you'll be paying for that right. Or for that
just move the homeless into the empty homes.
But I think that there is this element within the empty homes tax that actually is some key questions about what qualifies as an empty home, what gets you out of paying an empty homes tax, that actually some of the issues in terms of, say, the assemblies in terms of the Broadway corridor, that you'll see units that are going to be just one unit being occupied, not having to pay the empty homes tax. And I think this is a key problem, it's a key loophole that needs a level of reflection, that needs a level of transparency. Thank you.
We were talking about taxing and giving back for affordable building. What I would like to know if there is any incentive to try to attract investors as well as developers through maybe tax cut or things like that will make affordable housing, maybe increase the yield or this type of thing. Is there any people are thinking about this type of policy?
Policy to attract investors,
Policy.
to build greater affordability.
Yeah, maybe to increase the number of housing. What would be the kind of things the government could do to attract less people, and maybe don't have to give so much money? You will have more, you will be more in a situation where some investors would like to go.
Yeah, there is so Canada and BC have a very underdeveloped social impact investment ecosystem. We, in the first 4 sites we built out under the city's land program, we still, even with free land, and the land was like worth $3.5 million for 358 homes. Even then, we had an $11 million equity gap. There was no senior government funding to fill that. So we entered into a limited partnership with a social impact investor called Newmarket Funds. And they put the $11 million in. And we pay them out, they clip a coupon every year for 4 point something. And then at the end of the 10 or 11 year period, we take them out, give them their internal rate of return, and off they go. And now we've got stabilized occupancy, it's much more manageable, predictable, the debt service is lower. So that works. That could work at a much, on a much grander scale. But the environment for that kind of social impact investment is very, as I said, underdeveloped and could use a lot more work and a lot more study.
Yeah, but for example, you say to a developer, if you build on this building, instead of having 10% affordable, you do 20%, we'll give you a tax cut, So maybe some people can lobby and try to see if they can change, make some policy or things like that.
Well, part of it is too that we have such a, like our non-market housing sector is so, we think we're doing great work because we're really busy. But the non-market housing sector is only like 3.5% of our total housing stock. In the OECD countries, it's like 7, 8, 9. And a healthy non-market housing sector would be about 20% of the total housing stock. And then we could stop something that's really frustrating, which is asking developers, private developers, to do things they just are not hardwired to do, right? Housing is really expensive, and it's hard to build it to make it affordable for someone, even at prevailing market rents. And we always seem to be in the position of saying to developers, we want you to build housing with an affordability profile that guarantees you'll lose money. Well, it's not why they're in business, to lose money. So I'm kind of tired of criticizing them for behaving exactly as they were meant to behave when they were first created. If government allocated resources to build out non-market housing, whether it be co-op or non-profit or indigenous-led housing, we could enter into partnerships with developers and social impact investors that would get the housing we need built at the rents people can afford, and the private sector could go and do whatever they do, as long as they stop complaining about paying taxes for it, right? Because, to your point about incomes and rents, right? We've either got an income problem or a rent problem. So if, the way I like to think of affordable housing, it's an employer wage subsidy, right? Because if employers were paying wages that could support market rents, we wouldn't have an affordability question. So if you are one of those employers, if you're talking about the Board of Trade or the Chamber of Commerce, and you're benefiting, your employees can afford to live in the city you want to employ them, stop complaining about the taxes you have to pay to make that possible, or increase wages.
Just one thing, don't we already have kind of some sort of sneaky way to get developers on board by giving them increased heights if they will give more percentage of social housing or co-op or some sort of community good? That's one of the things that's been going on in Grandview Woodland for quite a long time. They get increased heights. So that's not it's money for them because it's all profit.
Maybe if you have policy making, telling them, you have a tax cut.
I'm going to go to the panel here and ask, I mean, there's a couple folks here, I'm sure, who have something to say about the land lift issue, increased density and what.
Well, I mean, that's really the irony of really the new provincial legislation, because a lot of that was removed. A lot of that opportunity, I mean, like they're attempting to kind of reassess this, but then the ability to negotiate, the ability to extract that kind of lift is gone. So that's gone now. That is not an option. I mean, there are little bits and parts you can navigate through, but then now it's gone. And I think that was all based upon the belief that the market will provide all. That market housing, that greater supply for all will provide all. And I think that this is really where a group like this needs to organize and needs to say no. Right? This is fundamentally what the provincial government has done in terms of some of their legislation without necessarily the forethought or the planning involved in terms of what some of the ramifications for the new zoning occurs. I mean, you take a look at really how do people feel about the Broadway commercial development. Right? I mean, that will surely provide housing for people. Right?
Nobody we know though.
Not affordable housing.
But is that not what the market is supposed to provide? Will they not drip down towards affordability?
No.
Do you believe that?
No.
Then why do you vote for people who do?
I know.
Yeah, I'm hoping what's your name? Theo.
Hi there, my name is Theodore. My question is for anyone on the panel who wants to answer it. We get all this rhetoric around affordability, providing affordable housing, and it seems that the federal government likes to talk about it, but they are well aware of the ramifications of what real affordability would do, i.e. taking value off of people's homes.
Yes.
And Gregor Robertson was recently questioned about this, and you could tell he was gritting his teeth and sort of dancing around the question. So how do we square the circle? How do we achieve the affordability that we want while also not doing so at a rate that would cause more or less the Canadian economy to collapse? And where we see people losing, still having growth on the value of their homes, and there's all those condos which are now losing value, while also providing that kind of social housing, that kind of co-op housing for people, who are the 20-somethings like me who can't afford to live in Grandview Woodlands, and then the market, the welfare rate housing. This seems like a conundrum that's kind of been a tough one to figure out, and the feds are well aware of it. So I just would like to hear you speak on that.
Well, I think what we're hearing from the Prime Minister in that context is growing the economy. Like that is where the focus is, right, in terms of reducing interprovincial trade barriers, the utility corridor, bringing in Bill C5 to accelerate a lot of that growth. So whether we like it or not in Vancouver, I don't know what everybody does in this room, but we don't have an automotive sector, we don't have factories that give secure employment, we have a lot of small businesses, we rely on high streets, where we have these small mom and pop shop businesses to give entry-level work to folks who need it. And then we have tourism, and I think that's a big driver of our economy. And then we have development, whether we like it or not, is a massive driver of our economy. That's where the people in Vancouver work, some people, a lot of people. And then we have, I think we've got some of those, and then we've got a growing head office tech sector. Right, and that, I don't know what's going to say.
That's my elbows up statement.
So, I know we're sort of focusing on the affordable housing without collapsing the Canadian economy, and I think we have to keep looking at these policies, like the Broadway plan, and like the redevelopment of housing in the Broadway plan, came with an MOU where the city was agreeing to increasing density across 30 years by 30,000 units. That was, before my time on council, but that was the agreement that the city entered in with the province in order for the province to invest in infrastructure of a rapid transit line, or we would be snowed with traffic, and now we don't want to make good on the commitment we made to deliver the housing units. So, I know that everybody's really concerned with a lot of these public hearings, but that doesn't mean these projects are breaking ground by any stretch. And so I think there's rhetoric on affordable housing. I think there's rhetoric around tenant protections. And I think that's where we come in is, when we're there wrestling with these projects, but we have to be realistic that these projects are not penciling out. And the entitlements that come with the rezoning are part of whatever the developer's going to do with that in the future. And I can tell you, it's not a cash out with rental housing at all, especially with the inclusionary, with the DCLs, and the tenant protections. These are liabilities on pro formas that banks say, you don't work, sorry, go back to the drawing board. So there is a lot of fear mongering, I think, going on, and I know that tenants are impacted, but those that aren't, I'm more concerned about what Andy said about an emptying out of rental buildings, that they're not re-tenanting. Some, not all, but I do think there are, that is an issue and a concern that we have to keep an eye on. So anyway, I think it's about growing, it's about how do we grow it at a rate where we're not displacing folks faster than we're building new housing for them to go into. So the rezonings that are happening in the Broadway plan are happening on sites where there's no displacement first and foremost. And those are the projects going forward right now. So 39 stories at Broadway and Grandview. We had so much opposition, absolutely zero displacement. Now people who live 2 blocks over will have the option to go live in a beautiful new apartment where they have their own washer dryer, brand new appliances. Yeah. They get $15,000 or whatever the amount is to relocate. Their costs to relocate are paid for. It can be a windfall. My daughter would love to be in one of those buildings that gets to move, and then all of a sudden she's got a little starter bank account where she can start to save for something else. We have to take some of the fear, and I know commercial on Broadway was painful and very recent and maybe too soon to talk about, but no displacement. We have to start to build housing where tenants are not displaced so that we can grow at a rate that is healthy for our city. And I know Grandview Woodlands is an incredible community, but it's a massive city. And there are, not in square footage, not in square kilometers, but in population growth. And we've grown 114,000 people moved to our city or moved to our region, moved to our province, and we don't have the housing. That's what's causing some of the stress around homelessness and a fear that we could worsen this crisis if we don't build things faster. So it's not ideological, it's more in the middle. It's not yes or no, it's not binary, it's if we do, how, and how do we do it to have the best possible outcome with the least amount of harm.
Annie.
Thanks. I was going to ask Tom a question about Vienna, and then Andy talked about Singapore, which I didn't know about. So you're totally anti what Vienna's doing, or you don't think government should own. And what's the situation in Singapore? It all comes down to who you vote for, I guess, if you have a vote. Right. But could you talk about that situation in Vienna?
Yeah, that's a tough one, I'd have to say, I think Vienna is getting great outcomes with their approach, but it's a totally different culture, a totally different social and economic environment, a totally different scale. Like density in Europe is not the way we think about density here. We're terrified if we go from a 3-story to a 6-story walk-up here, and you know what I'm talking about. So my comment is very specific to our social, political, and economic environment, and where the track record, I think, shows that government doesn't do a great job of that. But again, I applaud those outcomes in Vienna and other places like it. I think there is a model, to go to the question of home equity. There is a model that we think we're about 2 years away from being able to roll out on the third phase of a redevelopment we're pursuing in Coquitlam. And if you look at the Champlain Housing Trust in Burlington, Vermont, and a group called Common Equity Housing Limited in southern Australia, they're working with what they call shared or limited equity models. And it's hard to do it here because they'd have to change the strata legislation to allow the community land trust to be a strata lease landlord. But the theory there is that if people are getting rich by going to sleep at night and waking up in the morning and checking to see how much the value of their property is appreciated, they haven't really done anything to add to that value. So if that can be aggregated in a community land trust model, and if the land trust can control the rate at which value appreciates to the resident or the owner, capturing some of that lift for reinvestment back into the community for the next buyer or the next round of affordable housing development, now you've got something more of a bit of a balance between what I would call unearned appreciation and earned appreciation. And that's something that we're, I think, as I said, about 2 years away from rolling out. We haven't done the market studies to know, you're really exploring the question of how big is the gap between the top cohort in the renter population and the bottom cohort in the owner population. And if that's a wider gap, then there's a market for that kind of model. If it's a very narrow gap, then it's going to be problematic. So stay tuned, we'll let you know.
I actually want to go back to Theo's question. It's a good one. It's an interesting one because of really what does that mean? And is there such a thing as a soft landing? I mean, for Vancouver, for metropolitan Vancouver to become affordable, you'll either need housing prices to go in half, so a 2008 Las Vegas style real estate crash, or incomes to double, a rural China Deng Xiaoping reform tactic. So it goes into really these questions about really how much things can actually occur and what can actually be delivered. And I think the issue isn't crashing the economy, but it's how much the financial system has come in to depend upon rising real estate and the kind of financialization of real estate. And really, what are the kind of sacrifices that we're willing to do? And I think this is really, really tough. I mean, for the homeowners in this crowd, how many would feel great if next year you get your BC assessment that your property values decline by 50%?
Yeah, if they give us social goods back.
Never bought the house to make money.
Right.
To live in it.
And really the message that needs to pass on that's an acceptable sacrifice. The question of
Ask that question again, let me record the answer.
but it goes into the question of civic sacrifice. Right? I mean, are you willing to see your housing values go down by 50%? Now, I think
sure,
for those,
everyone else's house goes down at the same rate.
yeah, everyone goes down. But I mean, this is the interesting dilemma when it comes to public policy in terms of talking about really what happens in Vancouver. Now, what happens if you're in Edmonton? What happens if you're in Saskatchewan, in Winnipeg, etc.? This is the challenge of federal policy. It isn't just about Vancouver, but it's also about all across the country, and what are the kind of implications when housing values decline? That I think this is actually one of the kind of biggest dilemmas that we're facing in terms of really how geared our entire economy is connected towards ever rising housing prices, and how many other kind of instruments are tied into that kind of economic structure. And really, how do we change? Is there such a thing like a soft landing? And what might that look like in terms of what we spend and what we can't spend on? And I think this is the kind of fundamental dilemma in terms of really sending a message to Ottawa, to Victoria, or to 12th and Cambie that there is a level of acceptance towards this decline in value, but in the gain of a community.
Moderator, fill in for a moment here and say, so obviously nothing can happen fast. I mean, you're never going to get a Republican elected on the platform, not going to never 100%. But what do you know? So it has to be sort of slower change. Are there good tools? And I put this out to everybody here. Are there good tools to slow the rate of increase? Because obviously the rate of increase has been absurd for quite a while. Are there ways to tone that down, capture that in some way for the public?
The rate of increase in terms
Yeah.
of the cost of housing?
Well, in terms of value of housing, like obviously housing speculation, land speculation in Vancouver that's the big thing, right? That's what's making things unaffordable to a large extent. So how do we control that? How do we tamp that down?
It's softened in the last 2 years, would you say, 3 years?
It would take
It spiked, right?
it spikes, but it also is related towards a level of political courage that I am curious to see whether that will appear. That I think that part of this is it's breaking down what kind of demand do you want to service, right? It's not a question of what kind of supply. I mean, we've so far talked about the issue of supply, but out of the spectrum of demand, what has priority, right? Should it be the person who's trying to find a home, a 20-something trying to find a place in the city? Should it be a family of 4 trying to set roots in a place like Grandview Woodlands? Or should it be the speculator? Right? And we already know that we have a system of housing creation that is.
Let me ask this question.
Yep.
If you have somebody who is going to, and they're 30 and they've worked and,
Yep.
maybe got married recently, gathered a bit of money together, and they're buying a condo in Maple Ridge.
Right.
They live in Renton, Vancouver. Are they speculators?
The issue of speculators is when they sell it within 2 years. That's a plain definition of speculation.
Right, so but if they, in 3 years or 4, like their intention is never to live in Maple Ridge, but maybe over time.
Build equity through
they could build a bit of equity and then they'll take it out and they'll buy something they can afford here eventually. I'm just asking the genuine question because we don't talk about this stuff, but this is actually what people are doing in order to appreciate, like you'd like your home to come down. I would have bought one 25 years ago. Do you know what I mean? We don't realize what we have until we're sitting on it. And as my kids, and like I didn't come from, my family doesn't have any, my dad was a laborer, my mom taught yoga, God bless her, but like doesn't make great money. I don't have an inheritance coming my way. So as somebody who now has 20 and 25-year-old, what's their retirement plan? When are they going to be able to know that they're going to be able to stop working because they've got enough saved? We know that the government and CPP is not going to be there for them when they retire at 60, 65. So how do they get in the market? Not to the cost of living and what we're seeing now in terms of quality of life. Why, like, Andy, you're the expert on that stuff. Like, that's what I want to know we're having a conversation about because that's actually what I think is happening. And then we call them speculators. But no, I think
they're not speculators. I'm not calling them speculators because there was a time that buying a home was boring.
So can I interject something in this? Like I've been sitting here thinking, oh, I'm just focused on homelessness. This is my priority. I don't care that much about homeowners. They have a lot of options that I don't have. But I'm a person that's living on a basic pension. It's about $2,000 a month. And I live in a co-op. And my rent is about $700 a month. So if you have non-market housing, you don't have to have a huge asset in order to survive. I'm living fine. So I just thought I would throw that in there also. I have to leave early so I can drive home before I get started. Good night. Hearing all of your concerns and listening to what everybody says. Sorry, but I'm taking off.
That point is so important, right? If you want non-market housing. And if you could build out non-market housing to be 20% of the market, so many of these problems would seem immaterial. So how do you get to the 20%? Well, here's what we won't see. Okay, Andy talked about political courage. What do you think the biggest single housing subsidy is in Canada today?
Homeownership.
But the tool, the biggest single subsidy in housing, it's the capital gains exemption on principal residences. Do you think any government is taking that off? No, not in our lifetime. What's the dumbest housing subsidy you can think of? The provincial homeowner grant, right? Another subsidy, even when the panel of experts hinted that they were going to release in their report, suggest that the homeowner grant be rolled back and the capital gains exemptions be eliminated. Both the federal and provincial finance ministers got out in front of the report's release and said they would never do that. Why? Because 75% of the population is actually well served in their housing, and nobody is going to tinker with their retirement income. So that's where the pressure point is. I mean, if you want a revolution in housing, take the two biggest subsidies, just the capital gains exemption and the provincial homeowner tax could fund the ramp to 20% of non-market housing without having to break a sweat.
Well, I mean, this is one of the most interesting things. Is, you know, for a long time, housing was pretty boring. It went up about 5% per year. It just ended up to be a very fancy savings account. And I think that this is one of the kind of bigger issues in terms of really how it's not a question of ownership or renting. It's about security of tenure, and how increasingly a large amount of Canadians just don't have that security of tenure. And how that's growing. And I think that this is really part of that kind of policy dilemma, is that we focus so much upon rento versus ownership. We haven't necessarily thought about really, it's actually more about security of tenure over anything else. And yet at the same time, I think this question of speculation, I think is an issue for particular types of product. I'm not taking everyone as a speculator. I think that this is really talking about very specific products and very locations, but yet it's also how, you know, how it's the marginal player that defines the pace of the game. That it depends on really how that game has changed over the last 30 years to really change land values, to really help shape the housing market we are right now. And I think this is part of that question, that moment, if you will, in terms of what is our housing system for.
Cara? Yeah, I think one of the things that I don't hear a lot about anymore is how much it costs us not to house people.
Right.
In terms of policing, in terms of healthcare, incarceration.
Right.
How many people with disabilities, I work a lot with people with disabilities, have to stay at home, they're with senior parents. What will happen to that whole generation once their parents pass on and they're getting up there? You know, those are the costs as well.
Right.
So we're also paying a huge cost if we move people around in and out of neighborhoods, like we say, oh, you know, all these people in Grandview can't afford to live here anymore, we're going to shuffle them out to another neighborhood. Well, you lose the volunteers, you lose the history, you lose the artists, you lose the connections, and isolation is one of the biggest problems for seniors. And a lot of our seniors have had to leave this neighborhood because they can't get housing. So, you know, if you could just talk about the costs associated with not housing people or making people move out of their neighborhoods because their neighborhoods are being gentrified and people are being moved around. Yeah.
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, one of the, sorry, I'm sitting down here, if that's okay, can you hear me? But it's really actually one of the interesting kind of policy elements, I guess that's what academics are to do, is really how do you connect things like health with housing? And really, how do you really benefit those that are doing the right things in housing or supporting housing, knowing that you'll have much more positive health outcomes? These social determinants of health is what is how people put it in the public health realm. And I think that is arguably one of the interesting federal kind of elements of how they would be able to connect housing investment with healthcare, simply because it's much cheaper to deal with someone in good housing than it is to deal with them in the emergency.
Yeah.
Well, it's too bad Jean isn't still here, because if you join housing to health, the next step is housing to humanity, which is what she's all about.
Which I think is one of the pieces we struggle with as a city, particularly in the downtown east side, and it's the quality of housing in the SROs in terms of social determinants of health, because that is actually very expensive housing for the provincial government to run, that the outcomes aren't great. And so the folks that really suffer are those that are sort of given that as their option for housing, rather than spending the money. And it's not all SROs. I will say SRO Collaborative does incredible work. There are incredible communities that are born of this empowered community activations that create a sense of one's own agency and control over their situation, their living situation, and how they support one another. And been through many SROs that have really done an incredible job. But at the end of the day, if we're not building self-contained, dignified suites, like units of housing that are livable in size, that aren't in light wells, and and all sorts of security risks, and so I think that is our low-hanging fruit in the city, and it's the piece that we need to be advocating. And I know we're talking about talk to the feds, talk to the province, talk to the city, but I can tell you on this one, we should be standing shoulder to shoulder. We're not a level of government that can deal with this in terms of the substantive funding that's going to be needed but we can enable it through zoning and land use, replacement of these units. But to Jean's point, Carnegie has been, I think it's 7 years now since that was expropriated. Or not Carnegie, sorry, the Balmoral. Yeah, so we're not moving fast enough. That is a site that we know is, if there's nothing on it, we could be building on it, and there's no foreseeable timeline that we know yet. I know the province is working on it, but anyway, so I just think that piece is a really important piece of the puzzle for the downtown east side specifically.
It's really challenging to come to grips with the way government is organized, right? And not just coordinating 3 levels of government, but the silos within each level of government. I mean, it seems obvious to me that for every new school being built and every surplus school board site that might be available, I mean, does anything make more sense than a mixed-use school, daycare, non-market housing, and health clinic on the same site? But try and get that idea across the various departments at any level of government, and it's a killer.
It's insane.
Well, I mean, one of the most interesting things is one of your biggest innovations was Britannia.
Yeah.
And then the biggest challenge is the fact that Britannia today would be impossible from my understanding. That's what people told me.
But we built something similar at Cole Harbour.
Cole Harbour, but then what kind of scale?
Yeah. Child care, school, and social housing all in one development. It's child care, elementary school, and social housing all in one development. It's really quite remarkable. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's in a very expensive part of our city, in Cole Harbour. So how did that come to be? Let's do that again, Yeah.
Honestly, that's what I'm talking about up north.
Yeah.
We built these communities for men, and they have high expectations. We have health centers, we have kitchens, we have first aid stations, we have beautiful areas for them to leisure, community.
But one thing I think is one of the kind of missing elements in here towards dealing, again, going back to the original question that brought us here, in terms of how do you leverage the federal government into into dealing with the downtown east side as well as its surrounding neighborhoods, is really the need for a regional response. That places like Surrey, places like Burnaby, places like New Westminster, places like West Vancouver have a responsibility to develop a level of affordable housing that isn't just counting on just the city of Vancouver. Now, at the same time, I think a moratorium in terms of what the city of Vancouver did was dumb, due respect.
I didn't vote for it.
Excellent, there we go. Okay, it was
I got
dumb.
kicked out of my party over it.
Excellent, this is the principle here. But really, the missing opportunity wasn't to say no net new social housing in supportive housing in the downtown east side. Is how do we have a team approach?
But I will say that is well underway. Nanaimo has new supportive housing. Surrey's got 800 units of housing in the hopper for that. No, not to you. I'm not criticizing you, but that was what was missing from that dialogue. Is just this pointing fingers and then saying we don't want it in our community because it attracts crime. It's not exactly an invitation for Richmond or Burnaby or somewhere else to build this kind of housing. And I will say with the federal government, this investment in housing is happening, and even just focusing on across not just our region and our province, but across the country. And a lot of people go to where they think they can get more supports and more housing. And we've done that for 30 or 40 years. So it's a generational change that's going to take quite a bit of time, I think, to see the dent in where people see that they can get the supports, they can get the housing, they can get the services in their home communities. Because that's where social determinants of health, best outcomes. But when we pick one again, not that you're doing this, but it has pitted one against the other, that, oh, Vancouver's done their fair share, we're closing the gates, you know, we're not helping people anymore. That rhetoric is so, I think, damaging. And also the province, you know, doesn't then see our city as good partners. But I can also say, building these developments in communities that don't have them right now isn't an easy thing either, because if it's your community, you might have a different opinion about if you want that beside your house or not. And we have to deal with that. That's why nobody wants my job, because we deal with that every single day.
Right, but I think there is a level of neighborhood planning, of neighborhood engagement that allows this to come and be delivered. That I think part of the challenge is actually how we're slowly losing things like neighborhood planning, and I think the kind of engagement that I think is allowing people to actually come in with these types of projects. That I think that within this I think environment, it is actually talking about how we have a responsibility to each other. I mean, one of the most interesting stats is the fact that, you know, some folks think of homelessness as people coming in to become homeless. That there's a kind of, people migrate to come in to be homeless. But yet, at the same time, you got to remember, 75% of people who are homeless on the streets actually live in that community. So.
Okay, can I come back to the list? And it's, I've got Carrie, Wally, and his name. Mama. So go ahead, Carrie.
My name is actually Terry, not Carrie.
Okay.
Okay. I am a board member of both the Seniors 411 Society and Foundation. And we can tell you the number of people that we have come in every day asking for referrals for housing and try to find housing that they can afford. We have 2 full-time staff members we pay, plus we've got a receptionist and other people directing them to where. And sometimes we have to tell them, well, sorry, we can't book you in for another month. But that is the demand. And it's so important. We try to get people to come in and, you know, sit down, enjoy, have coffee with us. We always have the coffee pot on and some goodies usually. We supply $5 meals 3 times a week and often afternoon tea. But it's so important that they cannot find housing. And it's just, what do? They come in, all we can do is take their information, we can help them fill out forms, we give them referrals to different agencies. We do have housing above our brand new units, but unfortunately it's all full. But you know, we really, really need to deal with seniors, as Andy said. You've got, you know, how many more are going to be on the streets? Because they cannot afford the rents that are being asked. And that's all I have to say.
Wally's next.
Hi, my name's Wally Coons. I moved to Grandview, Woodland 20 years ago when I was 15.
Life's been hard for you.
I'm on the board of GWAC, and I've got a few announcements to make, and then I have points to make to each of the 3 panelists who are still here, so stay on your toes. Yes. So, number 1, we've got feedback forms here. We appreciate that everybody's come here. Simon invited all the panelists, got it all organized. We think we've got a really good session going here. We appreciate the residents, the panelists. You should appreciate the board and tell us the things that you would like to have in upcoming meetings. So please, fill this in if you would. It also means you can get on our newsletter list, great Laverne, and we can have pre-printed name tags for you so that it's easy to meet other people and make connections. Also want to point out that we have a number of free buttons here. Most of them say, I love Grandview Woodland, but we've got them for Pleasant, Riley Park, Dunbar, Kitsilano, South Granville, and Point Grey. So if you want to come by and hit them, that's great. We have a tip jar. If you've got anything that's weighing down your pockets, just drop it in, that's great. We don't have a lot of expenses, but we do have some. And if you want to know more about GWAC, we've got these QR codes, so pick this up and take it away with you. And now finally,
we're ready.
So, Rebecca, on the Safeway site, you said there's no displacement. There's no displacement whatever project is put there. Just because there's no displacement doesn't mean the project that was proposed and accepted should be there. Yes? Yes.
I told you it was too soon to talk about it.
So there's, him asking me the question, you know, I'm only 35. So, you know, is there a reason why we can't work together to make a better project there over the next 4 years or so that is going to happen? And now for Tom and Andy. You're saying unvalued appreciation, and you're saying the market goes up, the market goes down. But what do we do? Where do we move if we want to try to sell? So that's the point. Shouldn't we just ignore the fact that the tide rises and the tide lowers, and let's get better housing built? That's it.
I think he was inviting us to agree.
Okay, last question. Go ahead. My name is Mama Mercy. I'm from the downtown east side. I'm an outreach worker at the Aboriginal front door. I sit with a number of homeless every day, probably like 900 in and out. I have 6 free bunk beds. They can sleep during the day. I have people going to detox. And as I sit there and serve coffee all day long, one thing that I would like, I see that a vision of is more, well, people are waiting for housing. They're saying, well, can just sitting here waiting for housing? How about detox or a waiting, a space for a waiting for detox? Some beds for people that are waiting to get into detox. For me, it's really sad to sit there and watch and look at all these people that are homeless with their heads down. I cheer them up, I make them laugh, I try my best. I tell them that one day housing will come, but right now, we house maybe one person a month, if not that, one person every 2 months. People are happy. I have a checklist going for dentists, doctors, taxes, go get stuff done while you're waiting. Go get what needs to be done, taken care of. I help people get into detox. I try my best. The homeless try their best. They hold their heads up. You know, and I just wanted to say I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm glad we're all, yeah. Thank you.
One interesting, I mean, thank you so much. It's one interesting question to touch upon, really that one about Broadway and commercial. I'm curious whether it gets built or not.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, with all these developments going through the Broadway corridor, I actually wonder if they just happen to be valuations courtesy of the state, that how many of them actually really get built. And really how much was used in terms of valuating that land so that it would be sold, because remember that developer, I mean, again, this is nothing council needs to kind of consider, but then something to think about is actually how in their financial documents they talk about monetizing the site, and how that move in terms of what was approved in the city in Broadway, in the Broadway corridor, in the Broadway commercial project is really going to get built, or how much was that just used to really make that a new valuation to be flipped.
Yeah, there'll be adjustments.
Right. So this is what I mean by the speculation, by the flipping of this. It isn't just one or small little units here. We're talking about systemic lots, all the while losing. I mean, that's one that won't necessarily, that's its own separate lot. But then it's really with these other buildings right around the Broadway, the Broadway plan. That how do you deal with monitoring this? Because they also stopped measuring this in terms of really what are the measures.
I think, again, moderate privilege here, but how do you tamp down on that kind of, like, you look at that site, and what it was worth, 10 years ago versus what it's worth now, it's absurd. It's way beyond any sort of, even the kind of gains you've seen in Vancouver. How do you tamp down that kind of speculative growth? Because that seems to be sewering us on affordability across the board.
Right.
And I mean, a quick comment on the project. Well, I read the.
I'm just gonna hold you there, because I'm gonna ask them if they have any, are there tools there we can to deal with that?
I mean, it's interesting because that opens up the discussion about land value taxes, right? And land value capture, and really what are the kind of transparencies, because the issue isn't the fact that the city of Vancouver has not approved developments. It's how many 20,000 units that are out there that just aren't being built?
That are entitlements without being built.
Yeah. So is that really the problem? Is the city of Vancouver cannot approve enough housing in this in
No,
the
it's
city?
that it's not getting built.
Right.
And so getting.
So is it the city of Vancouver's fault?
Well, no, we don't build housing. Well, we do now, but not that kind of housing. So yes, no. I mean, this is the final question I asked is how do we know it's going to get built, and is this a good deal for the city?
Right.
$57 million in amenities is not nothing, and that goes with the entitlement, as does the fact that it's all rental, no strata, as does the whatever $30 million in DCLs that they have to pay, including, so, they partnered up with Grandview REIT, right? Somebody said, well, you asked, can something better get built? Yeah, maybe the province should buy it. I mean, the private market shouldn't be expected to build something better that's community oriented. That's what non-market does.
Right.
Like that's just so we can be mad that a private developer owns that site. It's not even a question that we're debating though. It's just a fact. So unless a government body, and I tell you, Ian Gillespie would probably happily sell that site to anybody who will buy it at this point.
But I think, Rebecca, the issue is council, like again, not just yourself, but it's like councils create the value. Shouldn't they also capture some of it for the public benefit?
Well, $57 million is not nothing.
But it's not nothing, but is it enough?
Well,
Like, I mean,
we're talking about
given the kind of lifetime costs that are involved in these types of developments, this is actually the bigger question, is that it's not only about housing, it's about infrastructure.
Which is what that DCL
and have we
pays
added,
for.
which is infrastructure, but then it's how much it puts in, but then how much over the lifetime of that project will we have to eventually pay in? Like, this is the interesting financial.
I don't think we have any of those formulas. I mean, I'd be open to hearing.
But it's a
about it.
big urban finance problem, because the issue is not growth. The issue now is maintenance.
Yep.
Do we have the adequate systems in terms of paying for the maintenance of the city of Vancouver? We used to have an idea that we need to change, we need to improve our infrastructure at 1% per year, knowing that it would take 100 years to improve all the infrastructure in the city of Vancouver, and we don't do that anymore.
But there's only one way to cap value, if you want to, and that's move the land out of the market.
That's right.
So you move it into a community land trust. After it's in a community land trust, you want it to appreciate value, because that improves your loan to value ratio when you're looking for financing.
Right.
But it's all financing for use, not exchange.
Right.
But I do think it's a really important, because a question was asked earlier around the cost of reacting at a municipal level to unhoused folks is just one example, and it's not the only example, there's lots of them. So this is where, again, bringing it back to the topic of the evening, is our advocacy with the federal government is municipal finance reform has to go hand in hand with growing a sustainable community in anywhere in our country. And I think the federal government is now hearing that, but the provincial government has to come to the table too. Because we are not, what we're trying to cover with property tax dollars, that was a system that was created, 100 years ago plus. 1929, thank you. And now we're trying to, we're talking about policing costs, we talk about protests, we talk about general infrastructure. We are a city that's not 200 years old, we're about 50 or 60 years old, so everything's coming up for renewal. And so there's only one property tax base that's expected to cover all of those services. So we're talking to the provincial and federal government and saying there has to be a more equitable share not new tax, but an equitable share that allows us to actually grow our communities. Because you know what contributes to the cost of housing? Fees. Like, the developer doesn't say, okay, I'll take that extra bit out of my bank account. It just trickles down to the cost of that particular unit in the monthly rent. If we can get a more reliable stream of infrastructure funding, what have you, from senior governments, then that too will take some of the pressure off of everything having to be paid for through the private market. And the last thing I'll say, and I was at the Jazz Fest on Saturday, but even like the Taylor Swift concert, that cost us $1.4 million in policing costs for 2 days as a city. But where does all that provincial sales tax go? Hotel tax, income tax from all of the workers, provincial and federal. I'm not complaining, I'm just saying that that's how it works. And people, when we talk about it, say, I had no idea. So the Jazz Fest is asking the city to help with more grant funding. And I'm saying, how do we lobby together to the province to get more grant funding so that you can have David Lamb Park Festival back on that's now been cut? Because but like, we don't benefit as a city financially, but we pay for the engineering and the policing to make it happen. Now, it's important to us because we want a healthy, vital arts and culture scene, and it's important in a healthy city. But it's just another example of how we are working on an outdated municipal tax system.
I
would agree with
that. Rebecca, let me complain for you.
Thank you.
That I think, if I may take, is that I think, again, we talk about like culture, political courage. I think one of the most interesting aspects, particularly for cities that are doing the right thing, is actually let them have some of the property transfer taxes. Like a property transfer taxes, I think, allow them to really, part of it's based upon transaction, but part of it's based upon the fact that they've accepted a level of density, a type of level of transactions. Help pay for it. Municipalities only get, what, 7 cents on the dollar?
8 cents on the
8 cents on
dollar.
the dollar. Gone up a bit. But that on 8 cents of a dollar, that fundamentally, I think within the provincial government, it's within the property transfer tax that is a sizable transfer of funding. That why don't they fund the municipalities that are doing the right thing?
That's right. Yeah.
I'm just going to circle back. We really probably
We're
wrapping up here, but I'm going to circle back to the lady's question over here a little bit because it didn't quite get purchased, and it's the idea of like how do we look toward temporary housing? How do we develop temporary housing for folks waiting for detox, waiting to help them get off off the system they're in? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the project has just broken ground at Clark and First. That's going to have that housing where folks can go right in, walking off the street. But of course, it will come to a point where it's at capacity pretty quickly. But the model there is that there's detox beds, and then there's treatment, and then there's social housing, all in one comprehensive development. Because we know that those that go through detox and into treatment, if they don't have housing, stable housing, when they come out, the likelihood of falling back into the cycle is quite high. I think that's a model that should be advocated for more of. The city's also, I was happy to bring a direction forward that was supported in the last term, but again, for a recovery community center. So it really is, so for folks that on a Tuesday morning wake up at 9 in the morning and they're like, okay, I'm done, I want to go get help, and that they can go through a door that isn't a detox treatment center, but it would be staffed. Vancouver Coastal Health has this on their continuum of care, that it's a open door ready to receive
Just
folks.
a place where they can get grounded.
They can say, okay, I'm ready, because we know that the greatest chance of success in a recovery journey is when somebody decides that they're ready to step into that. And so we need to be able to make sure that we have an open door. That doesn't exist right now. There are great programs, Kettle Cafe on Clark, you probably are familiar, or the Recovery Cafe, sorry, by the Kettle Society. That's on Clark. And so there's some models out there that we're trying to knit together, that we need to do a lot more. And so can I just say thank you for all the work that you do in the community, because I have no question in my mind that you make a massive difference to people's lives. Okay.
Send them home.
Looking at that project first in Clark, looking at sort of many of the nonprofit housing projects we got going down, particularly by Hastings, some of the indigenous-led ones, one that's working with all the Blackwell. Like, this is a community that's really, open and asking for all kinds of different nonprofit solutions. So we're happy to take them. We just need to have somebody help us get them built. So I mean, I appreciate you folks making the time to really help us explore that question. I mean, I guess a lot of the answer that you came to is that some of it's at the ballot box, and I mean, we've got various choices coming forward. So let's make sure that based on what we're hearing here, that we make the right kinds of choices to change things here.
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
Just off of what Marcy was saying, like seeing 900 people a day and only getting one person into housing, like maybe once a month. We have 2,200 people with no fixed address in the downtown east side. Like, this is partly about housing in the downtown east side. There's 3,300 people with no fixed address in the city. And we're like talking about a lot of these really technical sort of approaches and solutions and like slow change and whether or not people are gonna get like a 15% drop on their property value and how they would handle that. Like, there's people dying and there's people like really struggling, like doing their best to just get by, and a huge community that's doing everything they can to support them. And like, we have to have quick, fast, immediate, like compassionate options. Whatever level of government, whoever it is, like levels of government have plenty of control over the police and how those people are treated in the neighborhood. And so like, I don't know if this is a question, but like, yeah, I mean, yeah. What she was asking, huh? It's the urgency, yeah. And like, what, like she was saying, what can people like? Yeah, where can people go? Like, what can people do while they're waiting? Like thousands of people that are just waiting, and people on BC housing wait lists for over 10 years.
One of the first things that the council can do is treat the people who work for the people on the downtown east side, Marcy, you, others. Treat them with respect. This whole notion of an industry.
We're completely okay. We're worried about people sleeping outside.
Well, that too, but I mean, that the city.
We're good. I promise.
But the city is just pretending there's not a problem.
Yeah. You know, Alberta, again, I'd go back to Alberta. Right now, in Alberta.
It's fertile discussion without a doubt, and it needs to continue. And obviously, like the focus of this could have been more perhaps on the folks in the downtown side who really just, they don't have any options, they don't have any place to go. Tonight they don't have anywhere to go. Tonight they're facing some really serious choices and a lack of choices, and that's, I mean, those are the folks, most of us will go home to a roof over our head, and those folks won't. So I mean, like that, I hear you. Thank you for bringing that forward.
When might the downtown east side, the uplifting downtown east side motion go to council? And if people are upset about that and want to say something about that, when could they maybe sign up to speak in opposition to that? Is it maybe, I know like maybe November?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all we know is in November, but yeah, it's like I don't know. What we're really worried about is like, I don't know, the effects of trying to create change that's in like this big market development while people who are unhoused are like still getting harassed and treated like crap and criminalized. So like, yeah, if people want to speak for something that is really community-led and community-focused, like November, sometime in November, yeah, I think that's going to be going down.
The uplifting motion is Rebecca's. Do you know when you're dropping it?
So the motion passed. Let's not get confused here. The Uplift Downtown East Side motion passed. There's A to K recommendations that include housing, local economic development, and health. A portion of it is around the downtown east side Oppenheimer district zoning, which is the 60/40 that staff put out community consultation. That is what will be coming forward in the fall. I haven't heard November, I heard the fall, so October, November. So that decision on that, and I would agree, that does need robust community engagement at the council meeting.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to keep involved, Carnegie Community Center is having a town hall on Thursday evening, discussing these kind of issues, so we really need
these discussions they're making a difference.
Yeah.
Like every once in a while, so just if you're looking for like maybe a good news anecdote, the more well-known the community housing sector, community land trust, your efforts come to be known, people start to notice and they start to do so. I'm sitting at my desk a couple of Fridays ago, and I see a letter from a law firm that I don't recognize, and I think, oh, who's suing us now. But I open it up, but it's a letter from an estate lawyer who said a lovely woman in West Point Grey had passed away and left her house to the Community Land Trust. Right? So immediately Googled it, 6-minute drive from Chip Wilson's house. Perfect. And
You might be able to put 20 stories on that.
four bedroom, 1 bathroom home, charming little house on a corner lot in the heart of West Point Grey. Sold in 1987 for 155 grand. Yeah, valued today at 2.9 million. Right? So I can't wait to, and I hope you're going to come with me to the next meeting of the West Point Grey Neighborhood Association when I tell them about their new group home.
At GWAC, we're going to do what we can to keep in contact and to spread the word about opportunities for us to come and say our piece, for all of you to come and say your piece, to say the kind of city you want to see, and to take that forward all the way to 2026 when we have a choice of council, to take it forward to the various choices that where the government really has to listen to us and go and say what you think this world should look like. Because that's kind of what we were trying to get going with this discussion, is really get a better idea and a more consistent idea of what we can do and what does the right direction look like. So, I encourage any of you who aren't that familiar with GWAC and are, invested in this community, to come be part of it. We're just trying to do what we can to sort of, foster good dialogue around important issues and make change where we can and encourage change where we can. So, thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to you folks for being here.